Many of the films, either written or directed by Charlie Kaufman, can be reductively described as being about a particular emotion or state of being. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is about heartbreak and regret. Synecdoche, New York is about obsession. This approach is, as I said, a reductive one. However, it does give us a window into one through line of Kaufman's work. He makes movies about aspects of what it is to be human. Continuing that tradition, his newest film, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, adapted from the Ian Reid novel of the same name, is about alienation. It is a cautionary tale about media consumption, centered around a man who is so divorced from his own humanity that he is left contemplating whether it is worth carrying on. The film opens on a man named Jake, played by Jesse Plemons, and his girlfriend, played by Jessie Buckley, as they prepare for a visit to Jake's parents. Though the narrative initially frames her as the protagonist, it is important to address this out of the gate. This woman, at least as she is portrayed in the narrative, is not real. She has no name, or rather, Jake calls her by a set of interchangeable names throughout the movie. She has no job or speciality. She is at once a poet, a painter, a student studying quantum physics, a film critic, a virologist. In short, she is the changeable lens through which Jake, the true protagonist, analyzes himself. Indeed, the narrative whole of the film, its framing of a trip to Jake's parents, is imagined. Everything that unfolds is a fiction created by Jake to speculate on the past that could have been. Of course, this is not apparent from the outset. The film plays its narrative relatively straight until the conclusion of dinner with Jake's parents, at which point the structure becomes far more surreal. The audience, with the girlfriend as a surrogate, is led through a series of moments in Jake's life, meeting his parents at 3 different ages. In tandem with the audience, she begins to realize, at least in part, her own unreality. In a book, she finds a published copy of a poem that she believed to have written and had recited earlier in the film.
Coming home is terrible. Whether the dogs lick your face or not. Whether you have a wife or just a wife-shaped loneliness waiting for you. Coming home is terribly lonely.
What she believed to have been an original composition was in fact Bone Dog, a work from the poet Ava H.D. In Jake's childhood bedroom, she sees and flips through a copy of film critic Pauline Kael's famously negative review of A Woman Under the Influence, which she later recites verbatim, believing it to be part of her own essay. Bone Dog and Kael's review are representative of what many viewers take away as the most salient feature of I'm Thinking of Ending Things, its backbone of referential content. Negative reviews point this out as a weakness, that Kaufman is relying on frequent pop culture references to prop the film up on a series of Easter eggs. To borrow an apparently popular critique, Kaufman wants to make the viewer feel smart by feeding them moments that scream, "I know what this is from." This view, however, which characterizes I'm Thinking of Ending Things as nothing but a pretentious series of finger aside the nose references, misses the point of including the referential content in the first place. These bits of pop culture, woven through the sets and dialogue, represent the pieces that Jake has used to build a piecemeal emotional outlook. To get closer to the heart of this, one can examine a particular conversation between Jake's parents and the girlfriend. After the girlfriend mentions that she paints, She says that she likes to imbue her works with a certain interiority, and to portray how she's feeling at a given time.
That sounds very interesting. Like that painting of that girl sitting in a field looking at a house.
Christina's World, Wyeth, yes, exactly. But without people.
How can a picture of a field be sad without a sad person looking sad in the field?
She shows off photos of her work and struggles to explain how a landscape may hold a certain emotion without an external cue. Here, in what first seems to just be an awkward interaction, Kaufman reveals the core of Jake's struggle, his inability to articulate his own emotional responses. Jake is searching for a bystander in the painting, someone like Pauline Kael or Ava H.D., to tell him how he is supposed to feel about the landscape of his life. This is a good time to take a brief detour and discuss something both tangential and yet integral to what Kaufman is portraying here: the idea of commodity fetishism, as first described in the economic theory of Karl Marx. Marx touches on the subject in the first chapter of his seminal work Das Kapital, where he says, as against this, the commodity form and the value relation of the products of labor within which it appears have absolutely no connection with the physical nature of the commodity and the material relations arising out of this. It is nothing but the definite social relation between men themselves, which assumes here, for them, the fantastic form of a relation between things. The products of the human brain appear as autonomous figures endowed with life of their own, which enter into relations both with each other and with the human race. In more easily understood language, this means that people, in purchasing the products of labor, which Marx calls commodities, replace their relations with the laborers and one another with their relationships with the commodity themselves, principally by assignment of objective market value or cost to said commodities. Commodity fetishism occurs as part of Marx's wider theory of alienation, wherein he describes the process through which capitalism separates the individual from their work, from one another, and eventually from the very nature of their own humanity. Kaufman's portrayal is not in and of itself one of commodity fetishism, but it does run parallel to it. Instead, I'm thinking of Ending Things portrays a kind of media fetishism, an obsession with the ideas of others, and how the assignment of objective cultural value to these ideas can lead to alienation from oneself. Another conversation, this one between Jake and the girlfriend after leaving his parents' house, highlights how this concept influences Jake's character. After a passing comment about how the girlfriend, having had too much wine, is a woman under the influence, the two spin off onto a tangent about the eponymous film.
A woman under the influence.
Amazing film.
I'm not sure I agree.
Jake allows the girlfriend, speaking as Pauline Kael herself, to talk over his muted defenses of the movie, and he eventually caves to her viewpoint.
I think Mabel Ongetti's bummed out because she's always trying to please everyone, so that she can be considered one more victim heroine for the women's liberation. Well, only by women liberationists who are willing to accept textbook spin-offs as art. Juno-esque Jenna Rowlands, Mrs. Cassavetes, is a prodigious actress, and she never lets go of the character.
I agree. I thought she was great in the role. seemed to me she encompassed
Now, at an
this character
indeterminate age,
as a
when her
sort
beauty is deepened beyond ingenue roles, Roland's can look old or young. Shades of expression transform Mabel Longetti from a radiantly flirtatious beauty into sad, sagging neighborhood drunk. Roland's externalizes schizophrenic dissolution. Mabel fragments before your eyes. A three-ring circus might be taking place in her face. Roland's performance is enough for half a dozen tours de forces, a whole row of Oscars. It's exhausting. Conceivably, she is a great actress, but nothing she does is memorable because she does so much.
He sacrifices his own meager opinion on the altar of Cale's cultural cachet. His reaction paints him unworthy, at least in his own eyes, of even holding an opinion in the first place. One gets the sense that these are common actions on his part, that he looks to art to find out how to view the world, and then he looks to critique to find out how to view art. He has, to use Marx's word, fetishized these pieces of media to the point that at no step of this equation are his own views considered. As a result, his emotional apparatus has atrophied, and he finds himself adrift in a hollow middle-aged existence with nothing to moor him. This middle-aged malaise is something that Kaufman has been sneaking the audience glimpses of since the beginning of the film. The focus occasionally diverts from Jake and the girlfriend to a high school janitor, a man who remains unnamed for the duration of the film, but who it becomes clear to be Jake's older self and the source of the in-movie fiction. This can complicate discussions of I'm thinking of ending things, as Jake's older and younger selves are not identical. For simplicity, the younger will be referred to as Jake, a somewhat idealized version of the man, and the older will be the janitor, the man as he is. The janitor is carrying on through his life, fabricating the delusion of a trip to his parents as a window into what he imagines could have been. Except it is clear that he even struggles with this imagining. He is seen to be building this scenario out of pieces of popular media. At one point, the janitor is seen watching a fictional movie by real-life director Robert Zemeckis, and immediately afterward, the story beats from this fictional movie are incorporated into the janitor's own delusion. When his mother asks Jake how he and the girlfriend met, he responds with a poorly retold story about her being a waitress at a diner. The imagined scene plays out identically to the happy ending of the Zemeckis film. In this version, he espouses all of his girlfriend's virtues to the rude diner patrons before they both run off together to fulfill their dreams. The janitor places fragments of media like this on pedestals, using them to build a Frankenstein's monster approximation of his real life, a life that he himself cannot imagine from whole cloth, given the underdevelopment of his own emotional intelligence. This approach to media consumption, the infantile need to grasp at pieces of external culture to supplement one's own internal life, is reminiscent of the theories of consumption put forth in Marxist theorist Guy Debord's book The Society of the Spectacle, in which he elaborates on Marx's commodity fetishism and how it has evolved to suit the modern world. In the first chapter of The Society of the Spectacle, Debord describes how Marx's commodities, the physical products of labor, have evolved into the mere ideas or appearances of those physical products. The goal is still acquisition, but it is acquisition in the pursuit of gaining a certain desired appearance. As Debord states, the present phase leads to a generalized sliding of having into appearing, from which all actual having must draw its immediate prestige and its ultimate form. While Marx's fetishism is concerned with objects, Debord's spectacle is concerned with ideas, and by extension, media that is representative of ideas. The spectacle, which is in short an all-consuming and self-manifesting phenomena that embodies and reinforces a capitalist world order, converts all things and experiences into ephemeral ideas in order to separate and alienate all people from the world around them. The more people pursue these ideas, the more separate from the ideas they become. One can see the spectacle represented in I'm Thinking of Ending Things as the endless amount of media that Jake consumes in a futile attempt to become closer to the world and the people around him. A Woman Under the Influence, Kale's Review, Ava H.T.'s poem, The Girlfriend's Paintings, which are in fact the landscape paintings of Ralph Albert Blakelock, are all products of the spectacular culture machine, and in his constant consumption, Jake allows himself to be taken in by the spectacle itself. Given what was mentioned here previously, that Kaufman's films each represent an aspect of what it is to be human, it may be easy to presume that his newest film is specifically meant as a guide to reading the rest of his own filmography. However, given the extent to which it addresses the spectacular, it becomes clear that I'm Thinking of Ending Things is Kaufman's response to a systemic social issue, a plague in which individuals seek to enrich their own lives through the media of others rather than their own experiences. Jake is the everyman who sits at home, compulsively streaming movies, reading listicles and critiques, and, in very contemporary parlance, doom scrolling through social media content created by others. All of this in the service of filling some personal emptiness. Jake is what we do to keep ourselves away from the one question.
There's only one question to resolve. I'm scared. I feel a little crazy. I'm not lucid. The assumptions are right. I can feel my fear growing. Now is the time for the answer. Just one question. One question to answer.
Whether an empty life is one worth living. This phenomena, the compulsive consumption of fragments of other people's experiences, has become all the more prevalent over the last year, a period dominated by a worldwide pandemic. Some media theorists have hypothesized that this period of quarantine has accelerated an already existing trend in social media usage, that fewer and fewer individuals are actually creating content, and that greater numbers are engaged in behavior known as lurking. When questioned, many respondents to surveys on the topic stated that they felt too guilty to post the kind of content that they may have pre-pandemic, given that so many people did not have the opportunity to engage in common social experiences. Along this same vein, many others reported that they simply had no content that they felt was worth posting. The common thread here: individuals are becoming disillusioned and alienated from activities they had previously turned to for fulfillment and validation. At the same time, insular groups of elite young creators, both able and willing to ignore quarantine restrictions, were seen to increase their content output. These windows into influencer culture and the wild quarantine parties of content houses filled the feeds of predominantly young audiences, becoming young people's vicarious access to experiences that they were becoming both emotionally and physically estranged from. The use of social media easily translates to a Debordian lens. Platforms like Twitter and Instagram are the means of production through which average people manufacture abstract images of the world that fuel the spectacle. Much like the way that many modern media theorists discuss social media, Debord spends the entire first chapter of The Society of the Spectacle articulating how the spectacle unites people through separation, that it creates the illusion of unity while actively working to keep people alienated and apart. Social media abstracts and separates life in the same way. The stories, pictures, opinions, and other content that is posted and consumed all serve to create an artificial representation of people's lives, with the implicit goal of being lusted after by others. And in many cases, it is a lust that cannot be fulfilled, instead leaving people with a growing need to consume these images and gain the appearance of what one thinks the ideal life is. Whether one knows it or not, the cycle of posting and consuming hollow content ultimately leads to the state of personal emptiness that Kaufman portrays in Jake.
And the mouse starts a-nibbling on the broom, and the sun flicks my eyes. It was all a pack of lies!
Of course, this culture of empty consumption does not lead most people to the contemplation of suicide. One of the inherent functions of society, as articulated by Marx and subsequent theorists like Debord, is the creation of a false consciousness. Essentially, the idea that exploitation under capitalism is the natural state of things and either cannot or should not be changed. This same phenomenon carries over to commodity and media fetishism, that the habitual consumption of media, instead of generating personal experiences, is a generally positive thing. Debord explains this as the spectacle planting false ideas in people's minds of what they can achieve under a capitalist society. As he says, the modern spectacle expresses what society can do, but in this expression, the permitted is absolutely opposed to the possible. Throughout I'm Thinking of Ending Things, Jake is struggling against this false consciousness. He has come to realize that, despite his voracious consumption of the media of others, his existence is one devoid of purpose or pleasure. This is the preamble to the film's events, and his reason for visualizing a world in which he retained more genuine connections. The film ends with Jake giving an award acceptance speech taken almost word from word from A Beautiful Mind, before lapsing into a performance of Lonely Room, a ballad sung by the villain of the musical Oklahoma. Lonely Room is seen as the sequence of Oklahoma in which the antagonist, Judd Fry, realizes how pitiful and empty his life is, and resolves to do whatever he can to win the musical's heroine as his wife. A popular interpretation of this ending is that Jake, too, comes face to face with his misery and breaks out of his delusion, leading to his subsequent suicide. Through the lens of the Society of the Spectacle, though, this ending takes on a slightly different tone. Though the song Lonely Room may be interpreted as an admission of misery, the scene in which it is performed is entirely opposed to this.
The floor creaks, the door squeaks. There's a field mouse nibbling on a prune, and I sit by myself like a cobweb on a shelf, by myself in a lonely room.
Jake is not miserable in his performance. He is triumphant, falling into the role with no sense of self-awareness. The amateur backdrop of the play, the audience in exaggerated old-age makeup, the composition of the scene reads as the height of theatricality and artificiality, yet is played out with the seriousness of someone who has known nothing but the artificial. At the end of the film, Rather than breaking free from his delusions, Jake falls back into his false consciousness. If, in fact, he dies in a state of contentment rather than misery. He dies having come back to the sense that his emptiness is normal.
I'm your favorite clown from Tulsi Town, where ice cream grows on trees. So have no fear, come and join me here and eat.
To return for a moment to Debord's theory, he explains early on in the Society of the Spectacle that it is near impossible to discuss the spectacle in any meaningful way. Any media that attempts to do so in plain language automatically becomes part of the spectacle. Such is the nature of its uncanny ability to reproduce itself. Kaufman understands this, that at the end of the day, I'm thinking of ending things is just another cog in the grand media machine that encompasses everything. This is the purpose, then, of the movie's own surreality. When he explains the difficulty of discussing the spectacle, Debord also states that one can accomplish this by creating a kind of language that defies the spectacular. In employing non-sequential time, bizarre imagery, and unorthodox abstract narrative, this is what Kaufman is endeavoring to do. Create a piece of media that, while being part of the spectacle, can also critique and provide alternatives to the spectacular. In modeling Jake as the ultimate victim of society, he gives the audience a model of what not to be, of how not to live. Given his oeuvre, this is the perfect adaptation for Charlie Kaufman. With I'm Thinking of Ending Things, he is looking his audience in the face and telling them, I make movies to express what it is to be human, not as a guide on how to be human. Like any piece of theory, though, it is not a perfect model for praxis. In fact, attempting to provide such a thing would be antithetical to the anti-spectacular drive of the movie. Instead, it is something that is meant to be internalized and processed on an individual level. It is down to each audience member to take the light that this movie shines and follow their own path out of the maze of the spectacular.